to welcome you all to our next in the series of historic Jewish heroines. And there's a story of a man who arrived at a business district for an important meeting. There was a lot at stake. He was very concerned that he should be there on time and everything should go well. And with minutes, the minutes counting down to the start of the meeting, he is not finding a parking space. And he's circling and circling, and he is becoming increasingly flustered and hot under the collar. And as the time is passing, he turns to God and he beseeches God. He says, God, please, I beg of you, help me find a parking space. I'll donate this large sum of money to charity, and I'll do this mitzvah. And he's making deals with God. As he finishes his short prayer, a car pulls out right in front of him from a parking spot, and the man turns to God and says, "Oh, forget about it, God. I've sorted it out. No deal." So in Judaism, we talk about God a lot, obviously. God is very central, and there are different ways that different people can relate to God. So I just like to start with a bit of questions about this topic. The idea of praying to God and turning to Him. Do we tend to ask Him for things, or remember to pray to Him in times of need, in times of distress, when we are missing something, when we are in pain and we need help with something? Or do we tend to think of God and remember Him when we are experiencing special blessings in our lives? We feel that we have a lot to be grateful for. Things are going well. We feel successful and accomplished. I'm sure that for many of us, it's a combination of these things. But generally, I'd like to ask you to think about in which kind of situation are we more instinctively likely to turn to God. I'd also like to acknowledge and to talk about the fact that it's not so instinctive for everybody to automatically turn to God in either of these situations. Because really, if we backtrack and go back a step, there's the question of, how do we relate to God altogether? Do we feel that God is close to us and that we are close to Him, and that when we are in pain or when we are experiencing great joy, we naturally would like to turn to God and include Him in that, or request something from Him in that situation? Or perhaps do we feel that God is more distant? He is the creator of the world. He is like a monarch, a more distant, more aloof kind of being, whom perhaps we don't really feel that we can relate to. And it doesn't come so easily for us to talk to Him, to ask Him for things, or to express deep thanks and gratitude to Him when we experience blessings that He has given us. And there are those who might feel a lot of pain or rejection when they think about God. Perhaps they've experienced great challenges, big obstacles that they feel is perhaps unfair or overdone, and they have questions towards God about how He is able to do this kind of thing to them and cause them such difficulty in their life. And perhaps this kind of situation makes it even more challenging to think about turning to God, praying to Him, connecting to Him in this kind of way. This is an important topic to discuss, particularly now, because we are at the end of the Jewish year. We are in the final month, which is called Elul, and we are approaching Rosh Hashanah. We are just about 3 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, which is the start of the new year. And the month of Elul, besides for being the final month in the year, is actually a month where we spend the time preparing ourselves for the new year. And there are a number of ways that we can do this. One of the ways that this month is described is as Chodesh HaCheshbon, the month of stock taking, the month of review, of calculating. To just like in a business has a quarterly review or a semi-annual, analysis. We should look back during this month at the year that has gone by. How did the year go? Did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish? Do we have things that we feel like opportunities we feel that we missed, or things that we would like to correct for the upcoming year? So it's a time of stock taking. On the other hand, the month of Elul is a very special month because it's also known as Chodesh HaRachamim. It's the month of great mercy. God is present and close and merciful in an extra special way that he is not during the rest of the year, and he is more easily accessible. So we really have an opportunity over here that while we are thinking about how we are advancing in our lives and whether or not we are accomplishing that which we have set out to accomplish, or that which we feel is our mission or our task in the particular environment where we find ourselves, to also know that God is right here cheering us on and available to help us and give us the courage to move forward is really reassuring and very helpful. So when we think about coming towards the new year, Rosh Hashanah, God is going to be judging us. Our fate for the year is going to be decided. So we can be feeling perhaps some fear or perhaps tension. Or we could realize how God is really opening up opportunities for us with his great mercy and feel hope, feel opportunity. We can turn over a new leaf, we can change, we can accomplish something or reach a goal that we haven't previously attained. Now, if we look back in history, there's one well-known woman who played a major role in teaching us throughout the generations how to pray, how to approach God, and how to turn to him in times of need. This woman's name was Chanah, or Hannah in the English. She was a prophetess, and she lived, we are still in the time period that is known as the Shoftim, which is literally translated as judges, but we explained that it was a period of time after Moses had passed away, when the Jewish people were in Israel and the land of Israel already. The temple had not yet been built. The Jewish line of kings had not yet begun. And in this sort of interim period, this in-between time, there wasn't a steady leader of the entire Jewish people, but a leader would arise as needed based on the situation, based on the Jews facing different enemies and different problems. And we've spoken about Devorah, who was one such leader. So a few generations down the line, we have this woman whose name is Chanah. Now, aside for the Shofet, who was the leader who would come and go based on the particular need at the time, the Jewish people had the steady leadership of the Kohanim, of the priests, because even though the temple had not yet been built, we did have the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the land of Israel. This was sort of like a precursor to the temple. It was more temporary in its structure. It was also not in Jerusalem. It was in a place called Shiloh. And until the temple was built, the service of the temple would take place in the tabernacle, the sacrifices, the lighting of the menorah, and all that kind of thing. So during those years, the priests would do the service in the temple. They were also spiritual leaders for the Jewish people throughout the land of Israel. Now, it was customary on the three pilgrim festivals, which are the Chagim of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, for the Jewish people to make their way to the tabernacle, to bring sacrifices, to celebrate the holiday, to become spiritually inspired, because really it was the spiritual epicenter for the Jewish people. There was a greater sensation of holiness there compared to the rest of the land of Israel. And these times of year were intended to give the Jewish people additional spiritual energy and infuse them in this kind of way, so they could go back to their homes and continue to serve God at home and continue their lives in a more spiritually attuned manner. Now, for whatever reason, it had fallen out of habit at that time for many of the Jews to travel to the temple during these three holidays. And however, Chanah and her family used to travel every single holiday religiously. Her husband's name was Elkanah, and they were from the tribe of Levi. And they were very respected family. They were well known as noble, good people, examples of role models for others. And what they would do was they would travel from their home to the land of Shiloh through various towns and villages. And they were quite a caravan. It was Elkanah, and he had 2 wives and a number of children. And they would make stops along the way, and they would stop in the town square, and everybody would notice them. And they would make they would publicize why they were traveling and when they were going, and they would make it sound very exciting and like a wonderful opportunity, and they would encourage people to join them on their way. And the caravan would grow, and every city and town that they passed through, more and more people would join along with them to travel to the tabernacle in the town of Shiloh. Not only that, every time they travel for each holiday, they would choose a different route, so that people who had not yet been exposed to this experience could have a chance themselves to become aware of it, and also have the opportunity to go and have this experience of being close to God at the Mishkan. So they arrive this particular holiday to the tabernacle. Elkanah and his family offer up the sacrifices that are required for them, and the family has now gone back to whichever little place they had set up for themselves in Shiloh to partake of the sacrifices and to celebrate the holiday in a very festive way. Now, as I mentioned, Elkanah had 2 wives. His first wife was Chanah. He had another wife, Peninnah. And he actually married Peninnah because, unfortunately, his wife Chanah was barren and she was not blessed with any children. And Peninnah gave birth to 10 children. And what she would do is she's described in the prophets as Sarah, because which means sorrow, because she was it means sorrow or an adversary. She would taunt Chanah. She would say, "Oh, Chanah, have you bought some new clothes for your older child? Have you prepared food for your younger one? Are you going out now to greet them as they come back from their studies?" She would say things like this to Chanah, which obviously we can imagine were excruciatingly painful for a woman like her, who who was yearning for and longing for children, and she did not have any. Now, Peninnah actually did have good intentions, although this may sound surprising, because Peninnah recognized and knew that Chanah was a very righteous woman. She was a prophetess. She was very spiritually aware, and she thought that perhaps Chanah would come to a point where she would accept God's will and think to herself, if God hasn't destined me for this to be a mother, then perhaps I have a different role in life. And Peninnah thought to herself, perhaps if Chanah doesn't have a child, it means that she hasn't prayed enough. So Peninnah would taunt her to keep the pain, to emphasize her pain, so that Chanah would be pushed and provoked to go and pour her heart out to God and pray in a very great way for a child. And it's this particular festival when all the family is sitting there, and Chanah is very downcast. She's in great pain. Elkanah has distributed the portions of meat to each member of the family, and he gives to Chanah, he gives first, he gives the largest and choicest portion. But to Peninnah's family, obviously, they get more portions because each of the sons receives a portion. But Chanah's not eating. She's in so much pain that she has no children, that she's just sitting there quietly downcast. And her husband, Elkanah, tries to comfort her. He says, "Why are you not eating? Why are you so sad? Is my love for you not greater than that of 10 sons?" He really truly cared for her, but Chanah was not mollified at all by this, and she left the gathering and she went to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. She approaches the tabernacle and she comes inside and she starts weeping and just pouring out her heart to God in a way that she never has before. And let's see if I can get the text for you over here. No, that's not it. Okay, it doesn't look like I can get it for you here. So it describes the way that she spoke to God. So first of all, she was speaking quietly. Her voice was not heard. Her lips were moving, but if you were standing nearby, you would not be able to hear what she was saying, which actually we're used to that now, but actually that was not common at all in those days. At that time, prayer was said as a chorus out loud, with a lot of fanfare. So this kind of prayer was very unusual. And she spoke to God and really entreated him, asking him to give her a son. She prayed specifically for a son, and she addressed him as Hashem Tzvaot, which is the Lord of hosts. What does that mean, the Lord of hosts? Chanah was saying, God, you created two realms. You created spiritual realms where the beings there do not reproduce, but they do not die. And you've created physical realms where human beings, we do die, but we reproduce. So if you've created me as part of the physical realm, then I should be one who is able to give birth and continue my legacy. Otherwise, I should be spiritual. Another way to explain the way she addressed God is Tzvaot means, it refers to the myriads and myriads of species and categories of creations that God created, spiritual worlds, physical beings. I mean, if we just take a moment to think about all the different species that exist in the world, actually, when we were at this little vacation last week. So I was sitting outside, and it was absolutely silent. And it's similar here in Riverwoods. You can have the same experience. It was dark, it was silent, and it was so noisy with hundreds of thousands of creatures and these flying bugs and, you know, crickets or whatever they are, making their noise. And I was suddenly struck by the fact that I'm sitting here and it looks like there are just trees around me and there's nothing else, but really there's hundreds of thousands of creatures over here that I'm not actually seeing. And it was quite amazing. And that's just in one space. And there's an entire world out there, vast continents and countries. So she says to God, of all the things you have made and all the beings that you provide their food and their sustenance, you can't just give me one child. And she was really speaking to God in this kind of way. Now, she was actually being observed while she was in the midst of this outpouring. The high priest in the temple, sorry, not in the temple, in the tabernacle, his name was Eli, and he actually had a dual role. He was the high priest and the leader, shofet, of the time. He was a very, very righteous individual. And he sees this woman coming in and praying the way she is, and he confronts her. And he says to her, until when will you be drunk? Stop behaving in this kind of drunk way. And she turns to him and she says to him, please, my master, I'm not drunk. I'm just a broken woman and I'm pouring out my heart to God. So when Eli hears that she is actually not drunk, he realizes that she's not intoxicated. And she explains why she has come and why she is so bitter and why she's pouring out her heart in this way to God. He says, if that's the case, then God should bless you and fulfill your heart's desire. And she thanks him and she leaves, and they return home. And that Rosh Hashanah, Chanah conceives and gives birth to a son whom she names Samuel, which means lent to God. Because she had promised in her prayers that she is going to, if God grants her a child, she's going to dedicate this child to God for all his days. And in fact, that's what she does. She stays home with him for 2 years. She does not visit the tabernacle for any of the holidays because of the importance of caring for her child at this young age. And then at the age of 2, she brings him to the tabernacle and she gives him over to Eli, where he is raised. He is raised in the service of God, and he becomes a great prophet, Samuel the prophet. And he actually is the one who anointed King David as king. So let's backtrack a moment at the exchange between Chanah and Eli, the high priest, who was observing Chanah's deep outpouring of pain and beseeching God. And it's really a sort of strange exchange. Let's think about who Eli was. He was a high priest. He was a spiritual holy man. He was a leader of the people. He had interaction with numerous people over the many years. So for him to look at Chanah and to see what she is doing and to misjudge her that she is drunk is really very surprising. That he misinterpreted her behavior for that of a drunkard. So here is where we see how it's not enough to just read the Torah, the prophets, the scriptures on their literal level, because we could be missing a lot of the real story if we just stay at that level of understanding of the words of the Torah. And over here, it's especially important for us to look at the deeper layers and to understand what is really happening over here. Why was Eli approaching her in that kind of way? And moreover, when she responded to him, how did that prove to him that she is actually not drunk, and he actually blessed her? So we're going to talk about what is the core of prayer. We know the way that prayers work in the synagogue. There's different prayers, there's 3 prayers a day, set times for prayer. There's words that are written in the prayer book. There's all of those technical laws. But at its core, prayer is called the service of the heart. Prayer is when we pour out our heart and we connect to God. So the Torah speaks about connecting to God through pouring out our hearts. And the sages later came along to prescribe different ways in which we can fulfill that obligation. But when we talk about pouring out our heart to God, so Eli, he was coming at it from one perspective. He looked at Chanah and he said to her, this is how you're praying? This is how you're approaching God? You are so consumed with your own desires. You are obsessed with your wants and with your needs. You're drunk with yourself and with what you are lacking. That's not the way to approach God, to pray to God, to beseech him. We're supposed to raise ourselves up. We're supposed to rise above the physical. We're supposed to rise above the material wants that we feel that we're lacking. We're supposed to transcend and be able to understand that God has a grand plan and that he has a reason why he does different things. And the way that you are approaching God and praying to him is just not appropriate. So when Chanah hears this from him, she turns to him and she says, with all due respect, that's one way of looking at it, right? That is looking at God as a monarch, a sovereign who's removed, who's more distant, and he has a plan, and I can't bridge the gap between me and him. And the only way for me to align myself with him is to raise myself up, to elevate myself to a point where I can accept and see God has his plan. And I'm just going to accept it. But Chanah says, I'd like to point out another path to praying to God, to approaching him. And that is one of a child to their parents. A parent sometimes has to do something or behave in a certain way which the child doesn't understand, and it feels painful to the child. If a mother has ever left her child for any amount of time with a babysitter, perhaps the first time that you've left your child with a babysitter when they are very young, that is a very painful and difficult experience. The child could be crying, throwing a tantrum, kicking on the floor. Now, would we say that the mother should never leave the child because the child is crying and screaming? One of the important things for the child to learn is to be able to separate from their parent and become independent. Obviously, we want to do it as kindly as possible, but the general plan is that the child should learn that for the mother to go away for a few hours and come back is perfectly fine and normal. However, when the child is crying and screaming and showing their pain, the child is connecting to their mother or father in a very deep kind of way. and the parent is taking in and absorbing and understanding the perspective of the child in a very deep way at that point. And Chanah was saying to Eli that God is like a parent. He wants to hear the pain that I'm feeling. He wants to understand the way that his plan or his course of action is affecting me in my life. And it's not something that I'm just supposed to squash and ignore and move past. In the prayers on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's a special prayer that I'm sure you're familiar with, where we repeat the words Avinu Malkeinu. We say different phrases, and the beginning starts Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. And we address God with these two terms, our Father, our King. What's the difference between God as a father and God as a king? So as a parent, when we approach God as a parent is somebody who cares deeply for their child. A parent is invested personally in their child, in his or her success, failures, challenges, triumphs. A parent is also forgiving if a child makes a mistake, if a child messes up. A parent feels the compassion, and the connection between a parent and a child is instinctive and automatic. A king, on the other hand, primarily a monarch is running the country. They set out certain laws, certain rules that everybody has to follow. There's a certain vision the monarch has for the kingdom, and there are prerequisites for the subjects to helping to fulfill that vision. If you go against the laws, it's going against the king. It's black and white. The monarch is powerful and removed, right? Not specifically personally, compassionately feeling the pain of every single citizen of their kingdom. And as well, the connection between a monarch and their subject is not natural or instinctive or close in any kind of way. There are things a person can do to become an exemplary citizen, but it's not necessarily something that the average citizen would be able to reach. So there's a story of a father who was also a teacher, and he taught in a specific classroom, and his child was one of his students. And he would teach and he would discipline as needed, and sometimes he wouldn't really know which of the students had caused the trouble. So in those cases, he would punish his son because he didn't want to be seen as somebody who, you can get away with things, or he doesn't have control of the classroom. And one day the father comes home and he sees his son is sitting at home and he's crying. And the father goes over to his child and says, "My son, what's the problem? Why are you crying?" And he says, I have a really bad teacher." So his father says, "What's the problem?" He says, "My teacher, he's always punishing me. And when he doesn't know who to punish, he's always punishing me." So the father says to the son, "Why don't you ask your dad to have a word with your teacher?" So over here we have with God, we have the father element and we have the king element. And I think we know as parents that sometimes when our children go through challenges or difficulties, we're not always powerful enough to save them, to change the situation, to make sure that they won't ever feel any pain. But a monarch does have that great power to be able to change things around in a way that a parent cannot. So, so we need both the monarch and the parent, but we want the parent to intercede with the monarch that the king should be kind and treat us with compassion and closeness and forgiveness. So when we think about preparing for the new year, we think about Rosh Hashanah. It's a time where many of us spend praying and thinking about the year to come, and to recognize that in God we have that parent in Him who is invested, who feels our pain, who feels our joy when we experience that joy. And just again, an example of a child or a young baby. When a baby is starting to talk, so at first the baby just makes sounds, and then it becomes babbles, and eventually it becomes a little bit more coherent. So they start to speak words. But usually when they start to speak those words, only the mother understands the words that they're saying. To an outsider, it just sounds like gibberish, because they're not advanced enough to be speaking clearly yet, or they might have a made-up word for a particular object, and that only the mother knows. And that is true of God with us. We might be concerned that we don't know how to approach God. We might not have the right words to say. We might not have the right intentions. We might not know, does God want us to pray in this way? Does He want us to pray in that way? But if we remember that God is that loving parent, and even if we don't know how to articulate the words exactly the way that they are prescribed, as long as we find a way to express ourselves and to let our hearts turn towards God, God will understand, and God will take in whatever it is that we are showing from our hearts towards Him, and that will touch Him, and He will in turn bless us in the way that we, God willing, that we are praying for and that we are asking for. Now to just close the story about Hannah, when she did come back to the tabernacle with her son Samuel, she sang a song to God. We spoke about a song that Deborah sang, and now Hannah also sang a song which is written out, a beautiful poetry in the books of the prophets. And she talks about the fact that her son anointed the kings of the house of David with a horn. And she uses the word horn and not pitcher, because there were other kings of Israel. There was King Saul, who was anointed before King David. He was anointed with a pitcher. And Hannah was prophesying, this is one of the prophecies, that those who were anointed with a horn of oil, it was like a horn-shaped vessel which had special oil in it that Samuel used. Samuel was sent by God to anoint King David when he was still a young man. Those who were anointed with the horn, their kingdom, their line of kings lasted and lasts into eternity, because when the Mashiach comes and there is a new king, he again will rise from the house of David, whereas the others, after their reign ended, the line of leadership of kingship ended. So her special prayer for Samuel, and that he was born and that he was raised in the holy special way that he was, and dedicated to a life of service to God, was all Hannah's doing, and had a direct impact on the kingdom of the house of David, which lasts all the way through until the end of time. She did go on to have other children actually after this. There was more blessing in her life, but the most famous, the one that we know about, obviously, is the first one, Samuel, because of his special story and the life that he went on to live as a prophet of the Jewish people, and the one who anointed King David. So with that, we conclude our story about Chanah. I think the time period right now is very appropriate. It gives us what to get into the mindset before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And as we know, always as mothers, grandmothers, always wanting the best for our children, and that they should only experience joy and revealed happiness and goodness, and that we'd rather they not have to go through the growing pains. So God should shower on us experiences that we can grow from without having to have the pain that comes along with it, but that it's only positive and helps us advance. With that, I will end the stream.